I printed mine in a bigger font.
I still need a remembrance.
When I was a kid, I knew my dad was different than other guys. Since you've all knew my dad, that's probably not a surprise for you. Some kids had dads who coached sports, or dads that owned a house at the lake. I didn't have that, but I had the coolest dad. He wasn't cool in conventional ways, like I just mentioned. In fact, as you know, there was nothing conventional about him. He didn't look conventional. He had a head of curly, bright red hair and a bushy beard. He surfed. He salmon fished in a boat he built. He played guitar. He drove a 52 Chevy pickup truck. He grew weed, which by the time I became a teenager was definitely cool. As an elementary school teacher, the kids called him Rusty, not Mr. Pendry. He took his entire class camping for a week every year when I was really young. And I even went with him a couple times. But it wasn't just the way he looked, his hobbies, or his truck that made him cool, although those things helped. My dad was genuinely interested in other people. People he met knew it immediately. He always looked for something interesting in them. Something to be impressed with about them. And he would usually find it. No matter their background, education, job, or financial circumstances. In fact, I'm not sure he ever thought too much about any of that stuff. It never would have occurred to him that could even be important. Or that anyone was less worthy of his interest, respect, or compassion. He seemed always focused on the person right there in front of him. What most impressed me about his connection with others is that he wasn't trying to do it. It's just how he was. This carried over to how he thought about his children and stepchildren and grandchildren. In short, he unconditionally loved and supported all of us. I became a lawyer probably in part because I thought it sounded and looked impressive, or at least respectable to some people, and not to everyone here. But my dad was never impressed that I became a lawyer. He was just impressed that I became something. And I worked towards something and became independent and made a life for myself and my own family. He couldn't have cared less whether that was as a lawyer or anything else. And the same was true with how he viewed my brother and sister and stepbrother and stepsister. He was so proud and awestruck, frankly, that we were all out in the world doing something that made us happy. I think in some way he hadn't expected us to all do so well in life. Not because he thought we weren't capable of it, but in some way maybe because he doubted himself. Doubted that he could have raised 5 children that all turned out fine. Every time I talked to him, he told me about something one of my siblings was up to. I know this is the 3rd time you're hearing this. What Jason was doing at a new job, or Jessica or Lindsay were traveling, or about how skilled Logan was at his job. He was also not afraid to show his love. He told us he loved us. He teared up every time we left the ranch in Grass Valley, especially since his first stroke in 2011, because I think he always knew that any visit could be the last one. It's a lesson we could all take to heart when we spend time with loved ones. Once I became an adult and moved away from home and came to understand how differently others were raised from how I had been raised, I came to appreciate more deeply how unique my dad was. And how lucky I was to have him in my life. In fact, for a while, when I was grinding away at my career, I realized he was a lot cooler than I was. By this point, he had given up surfing and instead was riding a Harley. I would tell friends about him, probably to make myself seem more interesting. One time when I was in law school, I showed a picture of my dad on his Harley to one of my friends. My friend's response, only half in jest, was, "They let that man teach children?" I couldn't have been more proud of my action. Over time, my dad evolved. He continued to evolve, to try things, eventually getting rid of the Harley and instead getting a horse. To my surprise, as I got older, I started to become more like him in some ways. I became more interested in adventure and trying new things. He showed me that being an adult didn't mean you had to be boring. My loves eventually became travel and backpacking, but this no doubt came in some way from him, too. We had traveled a lot on long summer trips as kids, camping along the way, and both camping and travel stuck for me. My dad kept up his own adventures too. He joined a sailing crew and sailed up the coast of Mexico. He spent 2 winters living on a beach in Baja. He went to Costa Rica for a total eclipse of the sun. It was a moment he never forgot and never stopped talking about. My dad supported me in my own outdoor and travel adventures too. He was my backpacking shuttle driver when I needed to be picked up and dropped off at trailheads. No matter how remote, and he even went backpacking with me a few times. Not because it was something he set out to do, but because it was important to me, and therefore it was important to him too. He also liked shuttling me because my adventures then also became his adventures. As I look back, I realized that most of all, he just wanted to be the dad that he never had. He never stopped telling me how impressed he was with me and how proud he was that I was his son. Let me conclude with one story about how my dad immediately impacted people he met. Many years ago, I came to Grass Valley for a work meeting with 2 colleagues, Bob and Ron. Bob was my boss at the time. We had been in Grass Valley for a work meeting, and afterward I asked them to drop me off at my dad's place so that I could spend the weekend there. I was a little unsure about how this would go. I didn't think I had told him anything in advance about my dad. So we got to the ranch, and my dad was in the riding ring on his horse. Shirtless. Galloping around the ring with a couple other guys there helping him out. I think they were trying to train the horse or something. Anyway, my dad came over to us and got off his horse, practically leapt off it, like a cowboy in a movie. And I introduced him to my colleagues, and we talked for a bit. And then Bob and Ron went on their way, leaving me to spend the weekend there. So the weekend went by. I went home, and I went to work Monday morning. So Monday morning, Bob, my boss, poked his head into my office. He said, "Jeremy, Ron and I talked about your dad, and we agreed." Now I was a little nervous. "We agree," he said. "Your dad is like that guy in the Dos Equis beer commercial. He's the most interesting man in the world." Well, Dad, thanks for your love and support, for your generosity and compassion, for being the dad you never had, but also, thanks for being so damn cool, and maybe even the most interesting man in the world.
Rusty. He was the all-time greatest fishing companion. He was a self-proclaimed wild man, a brownie fanatic, a nap taker. He was a keeper of secrets, but never of love. He was a viewer of the cosmos, a political enthusiast. He was a seeker. He was a teacher.